Welcome to meeting number 120 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Before we begin, I would also like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidences and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. I'd also like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. And if members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or in Zoom. And before we begin, I'd also like to acknowledge that we have Madeline back in the room. We didn't appropriately say goodbye to Madeline when she moved on to another committee. So, so thank you, Madeline. You were fantastic in welcoming me and guiding me through my first little while as chair. And now we welcome Tina. Welcome aboard. So I think we're in good hands. So thank you very much. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 27th, 2023, the committee is continuing with its study of coercive behavior. I do have a trigger warning. Before we welcome our witnesses, I would also like to provide the trigger warning that we will be discussing experiences related to violence and coercive control. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If indeed you feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. For all those witnesses and the members of Parliament, it is important to recognize that these are very difficult discussions, so let's try and be as compassionate as we can in our conversations. At this point, it's my pleasure to introduce our witnesses. In the room from Coalition of Families Victims of Post-Separation Abuse, Julie Ryu, thank you. We also have from Little Warriors, Wanda Polson-Holman, Clinical Director, joining us by video conference. From the Safe Center of Peel, we have Shalina Jashani, Director, Strategic Partnerships and Collaboration, joining us by video conference as well. And from the Women's Habitat of Etobicoke, by video conference, Carlo Neto, Executive Director. You will each have 5 minutes for opening remarks, followed by rounds of questions. So, Mrs. Ryu, we will begin with you, and we'll allow 5 minutes for your comments. Thank you.
Good afternoon. The Coalition of Families Victims of Post-Separation Abuse is composed of survivors, along with allies such as lawyers, medical professionals, and mental health professionals. Our mission is to give survivors a voice as we felt unheard. Today, we want Canadians and this committee to know that leaving does not stop the abuse. In fact, it often escalates. Coercive control is the gateway to domestic abuse, post-separation abuse, parental alienation allegations, legal abuse, and at times ending in femicide and filicide. Our social and judicial professionals and institutions are often leveraged by abusers to continue to perpetuate abuse. At times, these professionals are complicit. Femicide occurs every 2.5 days in Canada, and 62% of perpetrators were either a current or former partner. Sous l'emblème de la protection de la jeunesse ainsi que l'indépendance judiciaire, les droits des familles.
And then there's the question of violations of charter rights on the guise of child protection.
A father has been convicted of raping the mother. The Child Protective Services confirmed the abuse by the father of all 4 children. Child Protection Services removed their supervision services, resulting in the father's criminal undertakings being modified. However, supervision remained at the mother's request despite pressure from family court. Meanwhile, the perpetrator is requesting spousal support and 50-50 parenting time at family court trial, and he will likely be incarcerated at the time of trial. The victim, a health professional who regularly sees victims of domestic violence, worries about recommending women leave an abuse situation, as she is cognizant that leaving the relationship to protect herself means she may not be able to protect her children. In Quebec, the Programme socio-judiciaire is co-authored and managed by the Quebec Youth Court judges and the DPG. It states that protective parents, usually the mothers, exhibit alienating behaviors since they often have a personality disorder or mental health problems. This same document exhorts that alienation is a type of psychological abuse, which they refer to as conflit sévère de séparation or conflit de loyauté. Thus, survivors are faced with systemic discrimination with judicial bias about mental health. For example, a father is charged with 4 counts of aggravated assault and 2 counts of sexual assault. The mother loses custody as she's seen as attacking the father and labeled as alienating due to the children disclosing the abuse to police. A 5-day criminal trial has occurred. In case of conviction, the DPG is planning alternative placement as the mother is not appropriate, as she continues to maintain that the father is dangerous. Let's be clear, these attacks that they're speaking about, going to police and testifying in criminal court. Cases like this are rampant. They are further complicated as they are seized by Quebec Youth Court, and the Quebec Court of Appeals does not hear appeals from parents. Children placed in youth centers, whose intent is to improve their lives, are routinely confined to cell-like concrete isolation rooms and abused by staff. When girls run away, they are strip searched. At their return, our children are not convicted felons, yet they're being treated as such. In Ontario, a mom discovered evidence that her teen son was being sex trafficked in foster care. She brought the evidence to police and CAS. In retaliation, CAS accused mom of sex trafficking her younger children and cut off her parenting time. Yet the police laid charges and convicted the person of drugging and assaulting her son. This mom has video evidence of fentanyl on the table, dad's with the kids nearby, dad's girlfriend shooting up, and countless videos taken by concerned neighbors. Also in Ontario, there's an issue with Superior Court judges as they are routinely ordering custody reversals due to alienation allegations, ordering reunification therapy without consent and reunification camps. The camps occur in Ontario, but children are also sent to the USA. This violates charter rights in the Canada Health Act as they pertain to consent to medical treatment and the child's right to have a say, as per the UN Declaration of Rights. In Western Canada, a father maintained 50-50 custody after being charged with assault. He had strangled the mother while the baby was in her arms. He pleaded to a lesser charge. He continues to have unsupervised access and continues his teaching career. Clearly, courts are not prioritizing the child's nor the mother's right to safety under Section 7 of the Charter. In conclusion, many women feel that they will only be free once murdered by their abuser. The voices of too many children are being silenced by death. Despite jurisdictional challenges, we implore the House of Commons and the government to make legislation changes to prioritize children and victim safety, along with stronger implementation of the Charter. Thank you.
Thank you. And you were right on 5 minutes. Thank you kindly for your testimony. Next, I welcome Ms. Polzen-Holman. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Dr. Wanda Polzen-Holman, and I'm the Clinical Director at Little Warriors. On behalf of vulnerable children and caregivers that we work with, I want to thank the committee for providing the opportunity to participate in this important study. Within my testimony today, I will focus on Little Warriors' perspectives and on the problem of coercive control, the need for reforms, and ways to better protect survivors. Little Warriors is a not-for-profit national charitable organization focused on the awareness, prevention, and treatment of child sexual abuse. Since 2008, our team has created programs that have transformed the lives of thousands of children, adolescents, and families who have experienced child sexual abuse from across Canada at our center outside Sherwood Park, Alberta. Little Warriors Evidence-Based Trauma-Informed Treatment Program at the Be Brave Ranch is the only program of its kind to offer intensive, specialized, multimodal treatment to children who have been sexually abused and are survivors between the ages of 8 to 17 and their caregivers. As the needs in this area of child sexual abuse unfortunately continues to grow, we also have an evidence-based educational workshop, Prevent It, which was created in conjunction with the researchers at the University of Alberta, with its aim to teach adults about child sexual abuse. We continue to research areas of mental health and trauma treatment, addiction, and adverse childhood experiences as these issues relate to child sexual abuse. At Little Warriors, we work with various stakeholders as well as a scientific and clinical council to ensure healthy outcomes for the children and families with whom we work. We consistently demonstrate high, reliable change recovery rates highlighted by our ongoing third-party independent outcome measurements. Research relating to our programs demonstrates a social return of an investment of 11 to 1 as this crosses systems of child and family services, education, health, crisis prevention, and criminal justice. Research highlights that upwards of 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys experience an unwanted sexual act before they turn 18, and recent reports indicate that over the past 5 years, online sexual luring of Canadian children is up 815%. We define issues around coercion in the context of child sexual abuse, obviously highlighting that children cannot provide consent for any type of online or in-person sexual abuse. Coercion occurs when children are encouraged or manipulated and forced to do something for sexual access. Of note, this coercion occurs in the hands of adults as well as other children and youth at times. At Little Warriors, we unfortunately see children who've been harmed through intrusive, exploitative, and traumatic sexual activities. We see this in the various forms, including online, where there is a lack of clear controls and where sites encourage children to become involved with potential offenders and perpetrators, as well as in person where children are abused, research showing that 90% plus of the time their offender being someone who is well known to them. Some recommendations that we would like to have considered are barrier-free supports across the continuum of care for children who have been sexually abused. Ironically, clinical supports are sometimes more easily accessed for offenders than survivors. A second recommendation is revisiting laws that continue to protect offenders, such as non-disclosure agreements and minimal sentencing. Short sentences without accountability often allows for reoffending, and data shows that approximately 29% of child sexual abuse offenders are reconvicted of a new offense in adult court within 5 years of their original conviction. Laws that require accountability for social media and online predatory websites. And fourth, an increased earlier intervention relating to awareness of child sexual abuse, coercion, consent, as well as human trafficking of children and youth. More awareness and support are needed for marginalized individuals and communities where there are higher percentages of people impacted. And fifth, for the government and parliamentarians to ensure that survivors of coercion have full access to support through victim services program. This can be done by making it easier for individuals to donate to charitable organizations and providing financial support to organizations like Little Warriors that invest in prevention efforts and work with survivors of coercive abuse. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions and look forward to working with all of you to address these concerns.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Polson-Holman. Next, I would welcome Ms. Shalina Jashani for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I would like to convey my gratitude to the Standing Committee for this invitation and to the survivors who have shared courageously their stories in the hopes of creating a safer country for all girls and women. We know the data on the prevalence of intimate partner violence in our country is overwhelming. We know that this is a phenomenon that is underreported. The numbers of victims are far greater than what we know, especially those who experience coercive control. My name is Shalina Jashani, and I'm the director of the Safe Centre of Peel, which is located in the region of Peel in Ontario. The Safe Centre is an innovative, evidence-based best practice model of how a community can work together to respond and provide a safety net for victims of IPV. The Centre has been in operation since 2011 because of the commitment of 24 community partners led by Catholic Family Services Peel Dufferin, who together provide an integrated and coordinated service delivery model. In 2008, our community partners began discussions that we needed to respond to IPV in our community differently. We couldn't continue to work in silos, duplicate services, and watch while vulnerable women with their children tried to navigate systems that we had created. Survivors told us that they did not want to have to repeat their stories over and over. They did not want to be told that they couldn't bring their children with them to these different services. and they often just gave up trying to travel from place to place and navigate a complex system that they didn't understand. They didn't know where to go for help and what was really available for them. We were losing our early intervention opportunities. We heard that it was particularly difficult for victims who didn't speak the language, were new Canadians, had low to no finances, young children, and virtually no support system. The Safe Centre of Peel recognizes that cross-sectorial collaboration among human services are vital in responding to victims and survivors of IPV. We see survivors who are coming forward with various experiences of abuse and violence. One of the most and sometimes subtle forms we see is coercive control. This is behavior that attempts to dominate, intimidate, and isolate victims. It involves psychological, emotional, and financial manipulation. This can play out as constant tracking and surveillance, threats, isolating victims from their friends and family, controlling finances and resources. This can be masked by comments such as, "I don't want to share you with anyone else," or "I will manage the money and let you know how much you can spend." At first, the various attempts to maintain control is disguised with the perpetrator's perceived overwhelming worry and concern for the victim, or the increased dependency of having their emotional needs met by the victim. We hear women sharing their signs of coercive control sometimes began subtly in the early part of their relationships, where he would start exhibiting jealousy and having an overdependence for the victim to cater to his emotional needs, therefore slowly beginning to isolate and control her. We know that forms of coercive control increase as the perpetrator feels less and less control. Research shows that relationships where there is coercive control can increase to high risk of escalating to physical violence, including severe assaults and even homicide. For many victims, coercive control creates an environment of fear and entrapment that can quickly deteriorate into more overt forms of abuse. The effects of coercive control are profound, causing psychological trauma, loss of autonomy, and long-term mental health issues for survivors. We cannot forget the impact of living in a home with this type of control and abuse has on children and youth. Following our recommendations, need for public awareness campaigns to educate Canadians about coercive control and its impacts. The goal should be to raise awareness to support early intervention and prevention. Invest in specialized services for victims of coercive control, including access to legal support, safe housing, trauma-informed counseling, and financial assistance. Integrated hubs like the Safe Centre of Peel that has a number of sectors working together should be adequately resourced to support the unique needs of victims experiencing non-physical forms of abuse to provide early intervention support. Law enforcement and justice need more training on understanding the holistic nature of the dynamics of IPV, which includes coercive control. And finally, further research and gathering data on the prevalence of coercive control and effectiveness of various interventions. In conclusion, recognizing coercive control early and intervening effectively is crucial to preventing potential escalation to physical violence, thereby saving lives. This is where we need the strategy and the investment. Thank you for the opportunity to share the work of the Safe Centre of Peel and for your commitment to address gender-based violence. I will be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jashani. Last witness testimony, we welcome Ms. Carlo Neto. You have 5 minutes as well.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Carla Neto. I appear before this committee representing Women's Habitat of Etobicoke, a feminist multi-service organization serving victims and survivors of gender-based violence and their children since 1978. We operate in 2 distinct service locations, a 25-bed emergency shelter for women and children escaping violence, and an outreach center in which many of the women are still living with abusive partners. It would be remiss of me if I didn't mention that in recent years, we have seen an increase of women escaping both intimate partner violence as well as human trafficking. Both locations support women to assess risk, develop safety plans, offer trauma-informed crisis and ongoing counseling, referrals, and advocacy to essential services such as housing, health care, legal services, parenting programs, as well as prevention and leadership programming for boys and girls. We thank you for inviting us to appear as part of this panel of witnesses, and we commend you on your efforts to further study this matter of coercive behavior. Historically, much emphasis has been placed on physically aggressive acts and intimate partner violence, and in doing so, we lack the broader context of relationships and miss the opportunity to see the role and impact of non-violent or non-physical violence. Although we can't say that coercive control and behavior will always eventually result in a physical abuse, it is fair to say that in our experience and work with victims and survivors of abuse, all physical abuse was preceded by and will continue to include coercive behavior. Coercive behavior occurs within the context of complex dynamics in intimate partner relationships where one partner exerts power and control over the other. Coercive behavior is action taken to force, manipulate, or intimidate someone into doing something against their will. It is harder to identify by family and friends, and it involves the use of threats, pressure, and force to control another person's actions. Unlike overt physical violence, coercive behavior can be subtle and often involves emotional, psychological, or social manipulation. That is the reason we often regard coercive controlling behavior as being invisible chains that restrain both victims of intimate partner violence and human trafficking. Some victims and survivors of coercive controlling behavior describe their experiences as living under a constant, never-ending threat. Others describe feeling that like captives trapped in plain sight. Those of us who are survivors of war recognize some of the same psychological effects and impacts in the victims and survivors of coercive controlling behavior. Coercive controlling behavior in intimate partner violence has two main components, the coercion and the control. Coercion can be the use of force or threats of physical aggression to alter the victim's behavior, and control is used to compel obedience by the victim by monopolizing vital resources, dictating preferred choices, limiting options, and depriving the victim of essential supports needed to exercise a level of independence. So some of the behaviors include, or some of the examples include threats of intimidation, isolation, manipulation, monitoring, surveillance, as was said before, controlling finances, victims' emotional abuse, and coercive behavior is often used in abusive relationship workplaces and other power dynamics where the goal is to dominate and reduce the victim's autonomy. Finally, we assert that strategies and efforts to address coercive behavior require a comprehensive multi-level approach that involves various stakeholders, including individuals, institutions, and communities. So legal protections and enforcement, where governments and lawmakers create and strengthen laws to criminalize coercive behavior, education and public awareness campaigns, nonprofit organizations and supports for nonprofit organizations and NGOs, schools and educational institutions where students can be taught about healthy relationships, meaningful funding for services supporting victims and survivors, training for professionals as it was mentioned already before, perpetrator rehabilitation and accountability mechanisms, financial support for victims and survivors, empowering communities like religious leaders, friends, families, neighbors, and developing technology and digital solutions that keep victims protected from surveillance, tracking, and harassment, promoting research and developing policy on coercive behavior to understand its effects and develop evidence-based interventions. Once again, I express our thanks and appreciation for your invitation to participate in this very important conversation. And I too am available to answer questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Neto, and thank you all for your opening remarks. We will now move to our first round of questions. I will begin with Dominique. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Oui, merci.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon to everyone. Dear colleagues, I'm happy to see you again after the summer break. There's always shocking information. It sends a shiver down our spine, and in particular the violence that we see in the media, and in particular violence against women. I had taken personal notes of the last 10 years. Violent crime has gone up, sexual assaults have gone up, murders have gone up, violent crime with weapons have gone up, and also those linked to street gangs. All of that has gone up. We're in an extraordinarily violent world. It's beyond our understanding, in fact. And since we've started this study, Madame Rio, I'm really overwhelmed by the examples that were given of women, because very often it's women that are involved who are victims of violence. There's evidence, they've proof, they've got videos, they've got testimonies of witnesses, and in spite of that, at the end of the day, she's the one who bears the burden, who's blamed, and they're held responsible for the given situations at hand. How can you explain that? You've talked about courts of appeal refusing appeals from lower courts. So there's a lack of understanding or lack of recognition of what's happening in women's lives. They don't understand what's at stake. They don't believe women at the end of the day, it seems. So how do you explain all of this? And which legislative changes are you referring to that need to be pursued? There's lots of questions within that one question, I believe. In terms of legislative changes, first of all, we need to have a comprehensive review of judicial independence compared to charter rights, because often judges exercise their judicial independence to hand down decisions where they believe they're acting in the best interests of the child. And that's what they apply, even if they're endangering the mother or the children. Can you give us an example of what you're trying to illustrate? So there can be a protection order that comes from a criminal court, so a criminal judge may believe that there's enough evidence to say that this person cannot contact her or her children, and the judge or the youth court or the superior court in the provinces will say we're going to remove that condition to facilitate access. So we don't want to be obliged to use a transfer centre with supervised access. They say we'll just remove this non-contact order, restraining order, just for access. And even for the children, even if they're covered by a protection order, they actually remove that to facilitate access, or else the judge may say, you've made it more complicated to have access for asking for another protection order, so we'll give them 50% custody rights. Incredible. And lawyers tell us that we shouldn't ask, in fact, for a protection order. And then when it comes to the superior courts, you've referred to the Court of Quebec, but in fact it's the youth court that's involved. In the youth court, the judges have inferred that they were talking about the socio-judicial program, and part of this program is to take up the youth file. So then the Superior Court of Quebec can no longer actually apply the Divorce Act because the protection procedures fall under the youth court. So they say it's an exceptional law, and the criminal court is meant to actually apply the charter. They don't actually do that, and the Quebec Court of Appeal in 2023 accepted, in fact, no appeals from parents who were appealing a decision handed down by the youth court. Madame Rio, you have also referred to the concept of parental alienation, and I can see that this comes up in what you've already raised. We had testimony here which was quite troubling on that particular aspect. Are you in direct contact, I imagine, with specific cases? All the cases that I mentioned to you apart from the example of the youth centres, is based on direct contacts with victims. And I asked for the victims' permission to talk about their cases. And with the youth centres, it was through an ally that I heard about that. So how can we proceed to resolve this problem of parental alienation? Well, personally speaking, I believe that we have to turn to the recommendations from the UN report and actually implement these from William Salim. And then secondly, I believe, now how should I put it? We have to be more structured in whom we actually accept as experts before the courts. Oh, yes, you can see that time's run out. That's very unfortunate.
Okay, next I would like to welcome Sonia. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all the witnesses for your important testimony. This is a very important subject. We are just discussing today the coercive behavior on survivor. I just really want to say thank you to all of you on your work which you're doing on the ground. And I'm from Peel, and Ms. Jashani, I want to say thank you. The team, you are leading that team and the work you are doing. And this is not the first time you're here, Ms. Jashani. I know you already, in 2022, we invited you to provide testimony on the intimate partner violence, domestic violence in Canada. In 2023, we all visited your center to another study on human trafficking. So you talked about, the isolated victim controlling finance, and your organizations are giving a support to women in Peel, multiple services under one roof. Can you talk about that, how you are helping women with this, with the multiple services once, how you are helping the survivors, the trauma-informed support.
Thank you, Sonia. Nice to see you again as well. The Safe Center of Peel works on those principles of trauma-informed care, where we have listened to survivors who have told us that they don't know how to navigate systems. And so we have taken over the responsibility of navigating those systems. Survivors have told us they don't want to repeat their story over and over again, and that they need someone to hold their hand through this journey, not just at the crisis stage, but throughout the journey. And so our partnership and our collaboration really works from those principles of providing that integrated care, so that we have a diverse number of partners that provide culturally sensitive care, language capacity if needed, where people come into our center and they go through one intake. They tell their story once. We've all been trained in the same area of risk assessment, so we're all speaking the same language of risk. We also know that when people come to us, they may be coming for a whole lot of different reasons and needs, but it gives us an opportunity to introduce other services and supports that are available that they may not have even known about. This is the early intervention opportunity to start to dismantle some of the things that they're facing, and especially for women who are been living with coercive control, where there's been a loss of self-esteem, where there's been an increase of mental distress, helping women understand that this is not in their head, that this is actually happening to them and deliberately, intentionally happening to them. So through these partnerships, we're able to come together, case conference, wrap around, and really be more upstream in some of our work so that we can provide that early intervention opportunity before things even escalate further.
Thank you. And you talked about the public awareness. What do you think the public awareness, what kind of the sources need to be used to do the public awareness, and then what age from the school system, from can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think public awareness is key. Having messages out there around what coercive control is, what it looks like, and what supports are available to help people through that. I think that we have very much identified in society what physical violence looks like, from all the various different forms of physical violence. But we don't talk about coercive control. We don't talk about coercive control to our youth as they're entering into and putting their feet into relationships and trying to help them define what is healthy. So when your boyfriend is tracking you and saying he just wants to make sure you're safe, what's the impact of that? What behavior is happening, and how is your autonomy being impacted by that? Those are some of those early stages. But we also know that children and youth who grow up in homes where there is violence, coercive violence, these are learned behaviors. If we don't have the opportunity to interrupt that, if we don't have opportunity to teach boys from an early age about power balance in relationships, about the way we treat each other, about how we ask for what we need, and how we respect each other in relationships, then we go back to what we've seen. We go back to what we've learned. And we know that there are a lot of influences that influence unhealthy relationships outside the home as well. But an early opportunity to do that. Many of our partners are part of our child witness program here in Peel Region called the HEAL Network, where we work with kids right in the school system, and we partner with our education partners around how we can do this, how we can get in there earlier.
Do you have 1 minute?
You have
How much
10
time?
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Anything else you want to say, Ms. Jeshani, about this, about staff trauma informed?
Is up.
Okay, I'll pass.
Well, Adrienne, vous avez 6 minutes.
Adrienne, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to our 4 panelists for being with us today. This is a troubling study. It troubles us each time we meet together on this study. And we see it in the news regularly, and it really reminds us that this study in coercive control is so important. Last year, there were more femicides than the whole year previously in Quebec, and the first femicide took place in the region where I am MP, in fact. And then on the 31st of August last, I went to a golf tournament, and then I had to go and offer my sympathies to a family where there was a golf tournament for Alice de Marie in Shefford in Granby, helping our women who are victims of violence. It was a very emotional moment to meet the family of this victim, this young girl who was killed in our area. And next Friday, there's an invitation from Alice Marie home, and also the group of women. And I have to go back and underline once again in 2024 how many women are being killed, and the fact that there's far too much violence being committed against women. I will stop with my opening remarks because I could pursue this for a long time to come, but I also have many questions to pose. Ms. Jeshani, in your opening remarks, you said we have to recognise coercive control. We need to start with what? What do you mean exactly when you refer to recognising the existence of coercive control? Do you mean recognising this from a criminal legislation point of view so that we can give tools to the system so that it can intervene? What do you mean?
Thank you for your question. When I'm saying that, I'm referring to raising the awareness of what is coercive control. What does it look like? I think really being able to name those behaviors, as well as naming the impact coercive control can have on women. I think that's where we need to really invest, because we know there are many, many women who do not come forward because he didn't hit me. He didn't push me. Yet they are living under these conditions where they feel that they don't have the autonomy, that they don't have any power, where their self-esteem has been impacted, where they feel that they can't even manage because they continue to be humiliated and told they don't have the right, nor do they have the intellect to lead certain parts of their life. And that kind of coercive control has long-term damaging on their psychological well-being. And we need to be able to talk about this, because we know that coercive control, however it looks, is usually the foundation before we start to see even physical violence, and before we even see extreme forms of physical violence like strangulation, which is also on the rise in our country. In Peel Region right now, which serves Brampton, Mississauga, we see 1 strangulation per day, and that is what is reported to police. And we know that not all women go to police. We also know the Strangulation Prevention Institute tells us the statistic is that a woman is 750% more likely to be killed by that man who attempts to strangle her. And the strangulation isn't the first step. It's the coercive control tactics. And once that person feels that's not effective anymore, you see the physical violence coming into the situation.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for those explanations. The problem is, of course, awareness raising. And this has to be part of education and equipping people to be able to intervene and act. So we have to look at the whole system, upstream and downstream. But if victims don't speak out, and that's what I'm hearing on the ground, there's still no criminal recognition of coercive control. I'm saying this because this summer I was meeting with elected officials from different parties, for example, from the Liberal Party when I went to the Pride March, and they were saying that coercive control, getting it recognised in the criminal code is very important so that we have the legal tools to actually be able to intervene and take action. These are part of the recommendations in the study Rebuilding Confidence, which came out in Quebec in a non-partisan way. It was all of the different political stripes of the National Assembly in Quebec who made this request to me in order to get this recognition in the criminal code. And now I'd like to turn to Ms. Neto. You've talked about the question of legal protection. What does that mean for you?
Legal protections. Oh, thank you for the question. Thank you so very much. Legal protections, actually, before legal protections, and just to add to what Shalina has mentioned, is the recognition that it exists, right? If we don't recognize, if the police is not trained on recognizing coercive control, they won't proceed in ways that the victim and the survivor will be protected. So when we get to our court systems, if the courts don't recognize coercive control, then there is no legal protection. So that's why I like to take a step back. In fact, I think what we need to do is a mind shift in this country. We need to recognize that violence against women exists, right? So when, for example, when a police officer comes to an incident of domestic violence, that the woman is believed. So if an officer comes in and the perpetrator or the husband in this case says, oh, she's not doing well, she's crazy, she has a mental health issue, and the police officer is okay with that, and does not proceed, we won't have the legal protection because that
Perfect. I'm going to have to stop you right there.
That's the issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Neto. Next, I'd like to welcome Leah Kazan. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll make sure not to see that 30-second sign that your new 30-second. But no, I'd just like to thank all the witnesses so much for being here today and the critical work that you're doing. I actually have a question for Madame Polson-Holman. You spoke a lot about child sexual abuse. And I was a teacher for a long time. And one of the things that I taught in school actually was sexual education. Why, and I don't know if you agree with me, but why is sexual education important in protecting children from child sexual abuse?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a really important question, and I agree that it is important to have it taught to children. One of the pieces that I think is really important is actually to look at the age at which we're starting to teach aspects around sexual education and wellness. I know that one of the other panelists was talking about this with children and teens when they're in junior high school or high school. I actually think it's very important for us to talk about this at an even earlier age as part of sexual education and wellness. And for a few reasons is to ensure that children at a very young age understand bodily autonomy. Still within many of our families and communities, it there's not the connections around, go give grandpa a hug, and that's sort of forced upon a child, or also giving children the proper language around their body so that they can identify when abuses are taking place. We often have testimony from children where they don't have the right language to talk about their body and what has happened in a situation of child sexual abuse, and it creates a lack of clarity for the justice system to be able to make decisions. So I would say that it's incredibly important to do this within schools, but also to support families to have the right language and to support caregivers really across communities to be able to do that.
Thank you so much. Just because I have a limited amount of time and just the most fabulous witnesses here, but you spoke also about the offender is often known to the victim. The reason that really stuck out for me is I know in the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, that was common, that the person that was a victim often knew the perpetrator, and sometimes in situations where they were forced to stay with them, especially an example would be kids exiting out of care or being sex trafficked out of the child welfare system. Why is it important for us to kind of redefine stereotypes around perpetrators? Like often it's like the stranger in the dark.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yes, there is a myth that is out there around stranger danger. Research defines that most abuse and most child sexual abuse happens 90+% of the time by someone who's well known to them and or someone who should be in a position to protect them.
How much time do I have?
Minutes.
Okay, super. So my question is for you, Madame Roux. You put forward a petition. You called for the recognition of parental alienation. This is interesting because one of the areas of concern around implementing legislation around coercive control is that there still isn't enough understanding about parental alienation and how parental alienation is often used against, or sometimes used against, the parent that for very good reasons has concerns about the other parent. Very quickly, your petition acknowledges that the injustice and human rights violations currently facilitating Canada's Family Court, recognizing the court itself as complicit in its continued abuse of women and children. Can you expand a little bit about that, about parental alienation and the dangers?
So just to be clear, that we want it banned, right?
Yeah.
It's a trump card. You go into court, you start talking about domestic violence, the danger the children are in. Oh, she's alienating. So it's also, you're under a microscope as a mom, a magnifying glass. If I do A, it's good for my child. If I do B, they're going to say I'm alienating.
For example, if there was a father that wasn't well and you said, you know what, he's not well, want to have a relationship, want to make sure it's safe, but I don't think he should have full access for good reason. Is that an argument that's often used in those cases?
It's
If you could comment. Sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you. I'm just going to allow just a few seconds just to wrap up that question, and then we'll move on to the next.
So as soon as it's used, the conversation about the risk posed by the other parent ends.
Thank you. Okay, Anna, you have 5 minutes. We're beginning our second round.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm not disappointed. I'm actually really, really disgusted, because I'm going to bring up two situations. In 1997, there was a killing. 4 children, the mother and the father shot them all, then shot himself, and before he did that, he put the house up on flames. And then in 2020, Kara's Law was killed. In both cases, and the reason I'm bringing them up because they're so far apart, is it doesn't seem like anything's changed in this country. And children are not being listened to. So I'm a lot disgusted in the fact that I think that A, the judges are not listening to the children, B, we are failing the system as women not to listen to them. But more importantly, how many of these criminals, I call them criminals because they're abusing our children and our women, how many of them are left out or out on bail right now today, and women are running scared? Anyone can answer that question. Does anyone have the answer? Julie? Yeah?
I don't know how many, but most is what I don't know of a victim that they're not out on bail.
And so,
when they call police, you probably were making it up if there's a restraining order, and they just want to see their children. That's why they came to your house. Those are the ones we hear.
So how do we, in God's name, protect our children when these guys are out roaming the streets? We know that they're going to do it again, and we're just allowing it. We need to be able to change the law, if anyone has anything to add to it, because I don't feel that we're doing them any justice right now.
In my opinion, we're approaching this the wrong way. Yes, they have rights. Yes, they're innocent until proven guilty. But the victims have rights. So where's the risk management? Where is the permanent supervision order? Where is, as soon as there's an allegation, we always have supervision until it gets cleared up? None of that exists. As soon as it's very rare to get a supervised access order.
One of the things that I hear over and over and over again by police officers is they feel their hands are tied. They go to the home, they arrest the gentleman. Well, why did I call him a gentleman? The criminal. And they put him behind bars. He's out on bail, goes again, and then he's put back in jail. There is a situation, and I don't have the numbers, and I don't know if anyone here does. Some of these perpetrators are embedded. There's no way that they will change. Do you agree with that?
Ms. Roberts,
Yes.
this is your time, but I do want to acknowledge that Ms. Neto does have her hand up if you'd like to acknowledge her.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see that.
No, that's okay, just for your
Sorry.
awareness.
Okay. Oh, there's two of them.
You can choose. I'm just bringing it to your
Okay,
awareness.
yeah. So, all right. Yeah. I'll have, is it Carla? Carla, sorry, can I call you Carla?
Yes, you
Would
can.
you like
Thank
to
you
answer
so very
that?
much. Yes, I see your passion for this issue, and I share it. I think we need to establish very clear accountability structures, and it starts at the top, right? Because we have had situations of clients who have told their stories time and time again in the court systems. In fact, one of the things we believe happens is that coercive control also is facilitated through the court and the family law system, because these criminals, as you say it, use the court systems to continue to manipulate and control, and in fact sometimes threaten to kill the mother if the children choose to be with the mother. So
not that I want to cut you off, but I want to add something else.
We start at the top.
I just read a book, and it's called Unsilenced Women. We had the two women here from out east, from Nova Scotia, and one of the things that kept me up at night was that I read in this book that families, parents are having children in this country and getting them ready as young as 12 months old to sell them on the streets. Why aren't we going after those individuals? And the children are being abused by professionals, by doctors, by lawyers, by priests, by judges. Why are we not doing more to protect those children? I also found out...
We have about 20 seconds.
Okay. Can somebody maybe... I'm sorry. Miss... I can't remember her name.
Little Warriors.
The one with the hand up. I'm sorry. Little Warriors.
Yes, thank you for, I'll be quick. What I think this is a more complicated conversation. It's not just about the offenders, because one of the things that I just want to add to the conversation that we see is an ongoing problem with intergenerational trauma. So when families and when mothers and other caregivers are in a place of trying to support children and youth, oftentimes they themselves have a very long history of their own abuse. And what we find in our program is sometimes when their child is in their program for the very first time, they are actually talking about their own systematic and intergenerational trauma and abuse.
Thank you, Wanda.
It's for the first.
Excellent. Next, welcome Lisa for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. All of our witnesses are excellent today. I just want to thank you all for your time and your attention. I'm going to stick with you, though, Julie. I'm sorry, but I'm seized with this problem of parental alienation. We know that it's happening here in Canada. I've spoken to victims. There's a story from August 31st, so just a few days ago, out of Denver. And the headline is Former Aurora Cop, not Ontario, charged with raping daughter, remains free as mom is sent to jail. So this is one of those cases, like you talked about. Dad is accused of raping his daughters and still goes and is able to fight for custody of his two sons. And when the mother protests, she's thrown in jail because she's opposed to this reunification therapy, which I've heard from victims of this. It doesn't sound like therapy to me. It sounds more like torture, and they're forced to take it. So I find the whole thing appalling. I want to go back to your opening statement. I'm not sure who you were quoting, but you said parental alienation is usually the mother, and it's psychological abuse. So maybe you can fill that in a little bit. But from what I understand, parental alienation isn't actually a thing. It shouldn't be a term. We shouldn't be using it in court and all at all. It's just a flag, like it's not a real thing. Can you please comment on that?
So the quote is actually from a training manual for workers for La Direction de la Protection de la Jeunesse in Quebec. I'm seeing similar language being used in CAS in Ontario. And it's not therapy, because for you to have mental health therapy, you have to consent. And the children aren't consenting. and you're not gaslighted in therapy. So these children go to therapy, RT, and they're told, forget about what your father did to you. You didn't understand. It didn't happen. And the therapists actually get mad if they do. One case that I know of, the judge, they reversed custody and they cut off contact completely. So I find it very ironic that for an estrangement, the solution is to estrange the child from the parent that they feel close to. So one, you're damaging them psychologically because you're breaking their affective link with their main parent. Two, you're telling them what they lived isn't true and to get over it. And three, you're forcing them into contact and custody of somebody that they have a genuine fear of. And even if the estrangement was not justified, it is still damaging to force somebody to see someone else against their will.
You know, I mean, this is coercive men don't just give up once a woman leaves the relationship, right? They're going to use every tool at their disposal. They're going to take what's available under the courts to use against their victim. And I know that provincial court judges are supposed to take domestic violence into consideration when they're making these decisions. But from my conversations with you, that's not happening.
That's not happening. And they're actually, you know, I think it's a question of being confronted to the fact that they've accepted that alienation is real when it's not for so many years and probably made decisions that harm so many families. They do not want to believe that it is not real and that it is actually an abuse tool. They don't want to believe that. And so they are actually saying that the mothers are abusive because they're alienating. It just doesn't make sense. And no, in our opinion, they do not get better. And that's what the research, and somebody that's more up to date on research would know better than me, but they don't get better.
I don't mean to cut you off, but no. So we know that more training for judges doesn't seem to be working. We already have a law that says they're supposed to take the domestic violence into account when they're making these decisions. So I'm wondering if you have any recommendations that would help us move forward.
I think it needs to be judges that have extensive domestic violence training. Remember that it's still not mandatory for them to take that training. And the training that's offered right now, I believe, is 90 minutes on Justice Canada's site. 90 minutes is not going to do anything. So that's part of it. And I think that there needs to be an entirely different avenue in procedures when there's abuse.
So if we banned the term parental alienation and banned reunification therapy, do you think we'd be getting there?
We have to ban it using definitions of what they are, because they're already starting to try to co-opt it and say it's family therapy, it's estrangement therapy, it's all kinds of terms. They're actually trying to say that PA is coercive control. So if we have to define it in an act to say what we're banning.
Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. Next, we have Adrienne. You have 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And once again, thank you to the panel. You're really enriching our thinking on this extremely important study. Over and above the question of criminalisation of coercive control, which is a request from Quebec to Ottawa, and that was studied in this study, Rebuilding Confidence, and they want that to be anchored in the Federal Criminal Code. I've also had discussions with people, elected officials in National Assembly, on this question of online hate. That's extremely worrisome, and there is a direct link between violence against women and online hatred. So why are we tolerating so much hatred, for example, from the incels or influencers who are actually promoting misogyny which means that there's a risk that we're going to be going backwards in terms of a society, in terms of the image that we're perpetuating about women and this question of violence against women, because they're daring to go that far. It's absolutely incredible. And Ms. Bolton-Holman, you've talked about social networks. Where do you see this link between online hatred, misogynistic online hatred, and violence against women being committed in 2024?
From the perspective of Little Warriors, we're seeing this in chat rooms and different online platforms that children and teens are involved in. Parents really have no idea about how to control this, and we're seeing that discussion groups, even at young ages, girls to other girls, unfortunately. From a bullying perspective, it starts there as well, and definitely is an ongoing problem that I think is worsening.
Yes, because many parents suddenly discovered the misogynistic conversations that their own son was pursuing and following influencers that were very misogynistic and were part of these groups. So how can we avoid violence against women if we allow this hatred to continue online? And if we teach young men that it's okay to be violent towards women online? Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you very much, Ms. Bolton-Holman.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, I just lost it here. Leah, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back, Madame, to parental alienation. I'll give you an example. In Manitoba, they have a program called For Sake of the Children. They had this years ago. And I don't think it was a bad program, because sometimes parents can be toxic in divorce. But sometimes there's cases where parents are raising concerns, not to their children, but to others, where there's real concerns in place. Because parental alienation is still in place, is still something that can be used in decision-making by courts. What kind of threat does it pose to individuals experiencing coercive abuse to be afraid to leave a situation? Like, let's say there's a violent parent, right? They know that they're going to be able to look after a child even if they say something because of parental alienation. How does that in reverse impact an individual's ability to leave a relationship?
I don't have the statistics, but I do know, I have heard many women say they would have never left if they had known at what level of risk their children would have been at by leaving. I also heard from a police officer directly that told me that they no longer, they as an individual officer, recommend that women leave if they see that it's not a physical abuse. If it's coercive control and emotional abuse, they don't necessarily tell them to leave because they know that it will get worse and they know that their children will be at higher risk.
Thank you so much. My question now is to Madame Jasani, is that right? Jasani? You spoke about long-term impacts of coercive control, and you spoke about like the constant feeling of fear, constant feelings of threat, and how it has long-term impacts of like post-traumatic stress disorder. And I've heard very much like war veterans. Can you expand on that a little bit? Okay, quickly. Sorry, I'm getting the finger. Sorry.
Okay, yes, quickly, I can tell you that we definitely have heard from survivors around the long-term impacts of such behavior, making them to a point where they can't make basic decisions for themselves and their children because all of that power has been taken away from them. And constantly being told that they don't have the intellect or the competence to make any of those decisions over their own lives. They don't even know how to navigate that anymore. And that is over years and years of tearing down that person and their sense of being.
Excellent. Thank you, Leah. Michelle, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much to our witnesses today. Very tough topic, and thank you for the work that you do and the, I'm sure, vicarious trauma that you guys have to experience every day. I say the people on the front lines are not doing okay, as my colleague Dominique said earlier, as all of these numbers have went up, so has the responsibility on you to be the front line to help all of these folks. So I really do appreciate what you do. This study that we're studying is about coercive control and what we need to do as a government to talk about it, or change policy or implement policy. So I want to keep that on the forefront. But if I can go to the Safe Center of Peel, I believe it's Shalina. Is it you that said there's a strangulation every single day?
Yes, that's correct. According to Peel Regional Police statistics, we see one strangulation in our community a day. And again, as I said, not all women report, so we know that is underreported statistics.
It's just shocking and horrific and awful. Do you know how many of the perpetrators, primarily men, who are doing the strangling are out on bail?
Unfortunately, I don't have that data.
One of the things I'm seeing and hearing in my own community is the police officers are responding, but then their hands are tied because of the justice system. They sort of try to help, but then they're sort of left at a miss because the man or whomever they've picked up is walking free. And there's the case that I spoke with over the summer in Newfoundland and Labrador for, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this case, but it was pretty horrific. The young woman who was killed by her husband and 5 children. And the police, the women detectives who were talking to me about this, there was so much pain and suffering. Like, the consequences of coercive control are so much bigger than what we think, because it's the front line like yourselves who are also taking this home. And they said, we knew this was going to happen. Like, we literally knew, and you guys, I see all of you nodding your heads, like you're seeing this escalate, right? These strangulation, it escalates. Like, I know, at least it doesn't get better, as everyone here today has said. One of the things I think is going to be very important for this study is an actual definition of coercive control. I think that's going to be really key in how we define this and move forward. And I know I'm going to turn, if I can, to Dr. Polson-Holman. Little Warriors, I know you guys do absolutely phenomenal work. Phenomenal. Life-changing, actually, what you do. And, you know, this stat you said today of 815% increase of online sexual luring of children is just, it's just awful. And the sextortion that's happening and the human trafficking, and I've spoke with your organization about parents human trafficking their children, which has been around for a long time. How would you define coercive control? And if not everybody can answer it, could you submit what you would like to see as a definition to the committee? If I could get everybody to do that, I think that would be very valuable for us. The other question I would ask Dr. Polson-Holman is, you said you rely a lot on donations. Your organization does very well. You have very wonderful, gracious donors to help with a lot of the programming. How have you seen the impact of the economy on donations?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind comments and for the ongoing support and awareness. In terms of your first question, the coercive control, I would be happy to take some time and thoughtfully put something forward. With regard to the second question, we are definitely seeing a decrease in charitable donations being made. I know that there has been some changes that have occurred and have impacted us, but I also think our economy has definitely had an impact. And Little Warriors has been around since 2008, and up until this past year, we have had very little support other than community supporters and businesses providing financial supports for our children and teens to come. And so my hope is that there are some ways to make more access in a barrier-free way for children and teens for programs like ours and programs like what are being represented today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michelle. Anita, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the witnesses here today. I have a number of questions. I'm not sure I'll get through all of them, but the amount of information you've given us is really incredible. I would like to start with you, Julie, because some of the things you're describing, to be honest, defy logic. It's things that I think every one of us at the table is just scratching our head saying, how could this happen, especially in our court system? I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit. You said something in the beginning about people being sent to the United States and something about an industry growing around this. If you could talk about that, because my concern is that it sounds like the courts might be unwittingly facilitating coercive control without even realizing that they're actually doing so.
I'm going to try and be politically correct. I don't know how unwitting it is when the AFCC is the one doing the training, which is a lobby group registered in California, and they do most of the judicial training. And their stated position on their American site is that they support alienation. And many of their members are the same therapists and social workers that charge over $250 an hour for reunification therapy. They require anything from $2,000 to $15,000 in retainers, so they don't bill like a normal social worker or therapist would. You know, you normally go see your therapist, you pay for your appointment, and then they return it. No, they just have a blank card. And the U.S., it is St. Clair, and that's what I was looking for my notes here because I had put them away. There's a case, St. Clair versus Wilson, I believe it is. I do know the survivor. Her children she was told to bring them down to the U.S., to New York, to turning points or family bridges. She was told to tell her children that they were going on a holiday, and then they showed up, and then these transporters took them. And it was, she had to pay over $40,000 Canadian for the pleasure of having her children abused.
So just to be clear, these are Canadian children going to who
Canadian court is ordering this.
And who pays for this? Who is
So often the woman is made to pay the majority or half, and if they don't have the money and they had a family home that was sold and put into trust, that money is used. So most victims are not exceedingly rich. Of course, the more wealthy the family, the worse it is. But oftentimes, by the time they are done court, they have nothing left for a down payment on a new house.
So just to be clear, the court order is to go to this particular form of therapy by this particular vendor, not to say there needs to be therapy generally, and then there's autonomy.
It has to be RT therapy, and they will order the particular vendor, and these vendors actually pre-write the court orders so that there's a 90-day no contact to be extended on the basis of what the therapist says. One of these cases, I think she was up to about 600 days since seeing one of her children. Another case, it was over a year and a half, and they finally seen the boy, and he didn't get on the bus and come to his mother's because he was told that if he did that, his mother would go to jail. So it is threat therapy.
How prevalent is this?
There was a talk about Peel. I think that's probably the worst place we hear about it. Peel, Brampton, that area, that particular courthouse is, you're very much at risk of having a parenting reversal and getting no contact. There was a case around that area, a 4-year-old, police enforcement they removed the child, and the child was screaming and crying, and there were 8 police officers. There are not that many of those cases in Ottawa because the Ottawa police sends their lawyers to court to ask that they not be police enforced.
So that goes to my other question about the remedy. You're saying here that from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, these things are different. What would be a remedy, and at what level of government could this be done?
Well, I think it needs to be the practice of removing a child from their main caregiver, unless there is, assault charges or abuse charges, or, there's a really good risk to give them to the other parent. I think it needs to be banned. And I think the reunification therapy, and if you describe it in that way, also needs to be banned, because basically what we're doing is similar to conversion therapy. It's an untrained professional, no domestic violence training. There is no regulation, because parental alienation is not under the scope of practice for psychologists, and they let it go. And the College of Social Workers seems to be mute on it, but that's where most of the practitioners are, is social work. And if they get complaints, they just continue as unlicensed instead.
Well, you're making a very compelling case. I don't know if I have time for other questions for the other witnesses.
You do not. We're already about 30 seconds over, so we'll wrap up at that. So in saying that, this has been some pretty alarming testimony. I would like to go into a third round. I have been somewhat lenient with some of the time. So for members in the room and for our witnesses, I will be firm and tight on the minutes moving forward. We'll have 5 minutes each for Dominique, for 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 2.5, 2.5, 5 and 5. So we'll start with Dominique. You have 5 minutes.
Je vais me reprendre.
Yes, I'll come back. And Madame Julie, I'm very interested in this question of parental alienation. And Madam Chair, please give me a 30-second warning before the end, because I've also got a question to put to Ms. Jeshani. So this reunification therapy question, if I've correctly understood the question from Anita, it's not necessarily something that's handed down by the court as an order. Have I correctly understood, or have I got the wrong end of the stick? The court hands down the order, but it's the therapist that actually give this prescription. It's almost impossible to get out of this. As soon as you object, then you're considered to be an alienating parent. So if you come before the court and the court says you have to turn up to reunification therapy, that's how things happen, then what actually happens with this is that the mother and the father and the children who are involved in this reunification therapy, there's different stages. From what I've heard from victims, often they start with the parents. Often we hear that the mum has to apologise and write a letter of apology, sorry that she was alienating in her behaviour, her abusive behaviour, and the father and the children are forced into sessions with the father. And often we're talking about a camp of 2 or 3 days where they're isolated together with the father and the therapist. And sometimes the therapists are also abusive. Oh dear, things are getting worse and worse. So what is the aim of this? What is the aim of this reunification therapy? To oblige the child to have a relationship with their father. So it's when the child objects to having a relationship with the other parent, or they want to minimize the contact with the other parent, that this kicks in. So when there's this type of prescription, if the child doesn't want to go and spend a weekend with dad or sleep at dad's, that's when this kicks in. And so then we draw the conclusion that if the child doesn't want to go to dad, if the child doesn't want to speak to his father, it's apparently then because there's been parental alienation carried out by the mother. Well, as you come from Quebec, I'd just like to make something a bit more specific. It's not the superior. there's a severe separation conflict, a loyalty conflict, and it's the directorate that does this type of custody reversal. And you've said that the therapy reunification is not even taught amongst the school for psychologists. So where does it come from, this concept? Where's it anchored? It's in which university course? You can't just make it up overnight and become a reunification specialist, in particular when it's got such a shaky foundation. Well, these are lessons that are given in the US. It's a concept that came out from a psychiatrist in the US who's pro-pedophiles. It's not accepted in the DSM, which is the International Diagnostic Book, nor is it accepted by the UN. So themselves, they actually self-declare themselves as specialists. Now, imagine not all of the judges are crazy. They're intelligent, they're brilliant, they're well-educated, they've studied, and they should show a great deal of discernment if they're appointed as judges. So they are going in this direction, which you have described as excessively problematic. How can you explain this? Well, it's easy. It's an easy solution. The child doesn't want to go, so we send them to this reunification therapy, full stop. They're not obliged to then listen to the abuse stories that they don't want to hear. It's an easy solution for the judges. It's a concept which has been growing for the last few years. Now, according to your experience, and I'm rounding off here, out of all of the parental alienation cases that come up, how many do you think are actually well-founded? I would say basically zero. Thank you.
And Emanuela, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our witnesses for being here with us to answer some questions on this important topic. You've all expressed the great concern with coercive control, and I think we all agree that it's an extremely important thing that we need to look at. It's the first steps in an abusive relationship, and so it could definitely escalate and become violent and much worse. And it has like major psychological impacts on the women and children. Now, does everyone on the panel today agree that coercive control needs to be criminalized? You can all kind of respond one. Yes, I see nodding everywhere. Okay. So from what I understand and from what conversation has been had so far, currently it is not seen or recognized as an actual issue. So if somebody does go to report it to the police, or it's just not considered and nothing is done about it. Okay. We've spoken about parental alienation as well. And from what I've heard now, psychologists are the ones who kind of... okay. So can you clarify?
Social workers are the ones that are promoting this, except in Quebec, psychologists are promoting it in Quebec, as well as social workers.
Now, I'm wondering why that would be. Because, obviously in Quebec, psychologists have, training and understand how the brain works and how, a child and a child's psychology will be impacted by certain decisions that are made. I guess I struggle a little bit with putting a ban on something like parental alienation. And the reason why I struggle with that is because I'm sure there are cases in which, on either part, the mothers or the fathers, it actually may be at play. And so I'm wondering what safeguards we can put in place if we are going to go that route.
So if we look at SHARA in the UK, they've done some research and they call it CAMS. So it's getting rid of the maternal bond separation. And the laws on coercive control in the UK what they've found is if there's sufficient training of police officers in the Crown and you look at it through a lens of domestic violence first, it becomes very clear who the problematic parent is. Because yes, there's counter-parenting that happens, but it's not alienation.
Okay. So would you happen to have statistics on how often the mother is the one accused of parental alienation versus the father?
So there is statistics that is on the VAW Network's website, and it's Canadian studies. I don't know them offhand, but it's a good 70 or 80% is used against mothers.
And I guess I'm also asking I see that someone has their hand up, so if you want to jump in, you can. But my question, I guess, is there a nuanced way of approaching this, or is it really just a ban? And I guess I'm wondering that because I think, children
If I may.
do benefit from having a relationship with both parents, generally, not if there's abuse, but...
There needs to be a distinction between a dysfunctional relationship that ends up in divorce and where parents are bickering and an abusive relationship. What we're talking about here is abusive relationship. In an abusive relationship where there is clear violence, whether it's physical, but there is also coercive control, we need to look at it from that lens. They are using parental alienation to dismiss the claims of abuse. That's what they're using. I think that we need to be clear. We need to have this conversation within the context of a broader dynamics. We need to look at patriarchy. We need to look at misogyny. We need to look at violence against women generally. But I will stop now and ask Wanda to continue because I know time is limited.
I just want to make a couple of comments. So
in about 10 seconds or less. Thank you,
sure.
Wanda.
As a trained psychologist that I work with and clinical social worker myself, I don't believe that it's social workers that are using the term coercive control. Perhaps it's caseworkers within CFS. I can't speak specifically for Quebec, but in other provinces, we are seeing this actually at Little Warriors coming from legalese, coming from lawyers in domestic violence situations. And I would agree with what Ms. Neto has said, that I think that there's further conversation that's needed and clear capturing of the terms.
Thank you very much. Adrienne, you have 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if there'll be another round still afterwards, but I'll turn to you for the moment, Ms. Rio. I had come onto you. I was talking to one witness per round. As we're referring to the situation in Quebec and other people who support criminalisation of coercive control over and above the political examples that I've cited, are also community groups that are asking for this. Last week, I met with a group of community organisations in Quebec. They're often funded by the health and social services system to help victims. So I think we have to look at violence against women as part of a continuum of services. There needs to be recognition so the women can see that a coercive control has been recognised, and then you have to offer them support afterwards so that they can go towards healing. So they need to have financial resources given. We need to invest, therefore, in our healthcare system so that we can also help the organisations on the spot to help victims. Can you talk about this continuum of services and investing in the healthcare system, not just in the justice system? I think the work that the H2 homes or shelters are doing in Quebec is amazing, first of all. They play an essential role. But when it comes to mental health services, that's essential as well. Our children have permanent scars. They live through the consequences of these traumatic events in the long term, and mothers also. because we are then actively traumatized as soon as we're forced to have contact with our abuser in order to carry out co-parenting, as it's called. So we need to invest in the healthcare system so that we can help organisations to help victims. It's crucial. There's a direct link between the support that we give to organisations and then the number of people who can then be supported on the spot. We need to equip them with the right resources. Yes, that is important. And then another group, I talked about politicians. I've got about 10 seconds left. There's another group, Julie Pop, that really help victims. And they're also asking for recognition of coercive control. So once again, it's to help victims. That's what's important. Yes, that's extremely important. Yes, it's extremely important. We are in contact with this group as well. And I think that we need to have jury pop throughout the country.
Excellent. Thank you. Leah, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm really interested in this reunification therapy, and this is why. There's, for example, in the riding I represent, certainly a riding, part of the riding that will be added after the next election. We have the highest number of kids in child welfare. Many families requiring reunification therapy for various reasons, impacts of colonization, for example, on families. For example, I'm just interested in hearing another perspective on that. And so I wanted to ask you, Madame Poulsen-Holman, your perspective on unification therapy. My concern is that sometimes there's lots of gray areas. It's kind of like parental alienation. I know, that questions about issues around that. Could you maybe expand on that? What your thoughts on?
Thank you for the question.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Yes, I definitely think that reunification therapy, from my perspective and in my own training, if you have a therapist, a clinician who's working with a child and family who's trauma-informed and who's using best practices, what is being described is not something that is best practices. What is needed is for professionals to be properly trained and trained with trauma-informed approaches and that are culturally informed as well. And in a way that the child is offered independent therapy in conjunction with perhaps both parents having their own therapy. I think when those things are put forward, there is a more robust picture that can be formed as a result of different perspectives versus it just being reunification therapy being cited as the most important go-forward plan.
Okay, thank you so much. I asked that because, for example, for kids in child welfare, and we know many of those kids are the ones in the child welfare system. We call that a pipeline to murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. What they found is it's actually often more traumatic for kids to be taken away from their families than reunited with their families. It has a detrimental impact on the parent, but also a detrimental impact on the child.
Thank you, Leah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Anna, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to direct my questions to Ms. Poulsen-Holman. I hope I pronounced that properly. Excuse me if I didn't. Thank you. So you made you stated that 29% reoffend after they are released. That was something that you mentioned earlier. And that 90% of offenders are known to children. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are exposed to sexual assault before the age of 18. So I need to ask you this question because I'm really concerned about this. So sexual assaults are up 75%, and sexual violations against children are up 119% since Trudeau took power. And yesterday, Toronto police arrested a man while he was already out on bail after allegedly sexually assaulting 3 women at York University campus. Can you please maybe help me understand, are these individuals that are being let out to continually abuse women, how do we change that so that we can protect the women and the children?
Thank you for your question. Yes, unfortunately, this spans not only to women, but also to children. I don't think there is a day that goes by in our area, in Sherwood Park and Edmonton area, where there's not a posting that is displayed by police or RCMP that there is a dangerous criminal who is released with concern. And we've had numerous situations where within weeks, within days actually, they have reoffended. So it is quite predictable, unfortunately, and the supports to ensure that vulnerable people are safe are not in place.
So I'm going to bring up something, and I hope my colleague won't be upset about me, because she has shared a story with me during her tour in Newfoundland where the man ended up killing his wife and children and went back to the mosque and basically said to other women, his words, "This is what happens when you don't listen to us." How do we change that thinking of these, I call them criminals, you can call them, if you want to try and rehabilitate them, I don't know how that'll happen, but how do we change that? How do we change that thinking?
Well, from my perspective, I think that we don't have proper deterrence in place. I think that that is an incredibly clear example of misogyny, and that our systems are not in place to protect people. My thoughts on that are that prior to that happening, as we've talked about today, there were probably numerous red flags in the community and within families that unfortunately could predict that.
So we need to make sure that the community and the families and the friends and everyone that surrounded these situations come out and speak up about it so that this doesn't happen. But I think a lot of times women are so intimidated that they're afraid for their own safety and their own families because they are living in this very similar situation. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do we change the law to make sure that these issues and these crimes don't continue? Do you have any suggestions? Besides putting them in jail forever? Sorry.
Well, I certainly think having clear deterrence and, when people are charged, that they actually have to follow through with those charges. We see that that doesn't happen. One other thought that I have about this is that there is and should be a duty to report this. The conflict with that is that in having a duty to report, there are women and other vulnerable populations who don't feel that they can because they can't safely report what they know is happening in their homes and in their communities.
And I guess I'm going to go back to a story that happened in my community, unfortunately, where a doctor, 2 doctors...
Anna, I'm sorry.
It's not 5 minutes.
I know, it was.
I think we need to get you a new timer.
Mark, 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to the 4 witnesses today. I think this has given us a great deal of alarming information, undoubtedly, but it will also help us to feed all this into our study. But perhaps I can turn to Julie and then Shalina and others if we have time. But I'd like to understand more, because we see that often the police officers have their hands tied, and we see that there's an issue with the justice system. Of course, that's a broad term, and then we talk about the administration of justice, and we talk about that being a provincial competence, but of course we've got the federal criminal code with the family courts. So when we talk about the reform of bail, once again, this falls to the provinces. So I'd like to understand this, Julie, and then Selena. When we're talking about definitions, we've talked about a definition of parental alienation and also the question of reunification and coercive control and a definition for that. So how can we obtain clear definitions so that the family court can clearly identify this and also identify where we've got the federal role and a provincial role with all this? First of all, Julie, Selena, and perhaps one and others. I think that we have got well-recognised experts in our country, Simon Lapierre from the University of Ottawa, to start with. There are quite clearly accepted definitions of these concepts that are out there. Then at a federal level, I think you can show a certain level of leadership. We've got the RCMP that works in the municipalities throughout the country. And I don't see why the federal government could not actually develop training for the police forces, for their policies and their tools, and then share these with the provinces and the cities, the municipalities. That would be a good start. And then when we talk about them having their hands tied, well, often police officers tell us that the level is not high enough for us to actually have criminal charges. It's not criminal harassment because of X, Y, and Z, but then we see cases where it was the same forms of behaviour, but it was a foreigner, and yes, they are arrested. So sometimes it's a cultural issue that comes into play.
Maybe Wanda afterwards?
Someone's raising it. No?
Wanda, do you have anything to add on that aspect, on the for the definitions in the provincial and federal, and how does that link for the clinical?
Just to add to what is said, I would say that we do absolutely need to have more clarity with regard to what is coercive control. And yes, taking a look at the definitions and whether or not to move forward with parental alienation, given what has been said today. I think that under the current laws, there are some very significant issues and the need to bring people together to address this is important, not only for women, but children and families overall.
Alors, Julie, tantôt... Oh, okay.
Julie, earlier. Selena, please go ahead.
Thank you. I also want to add that it's about also penetrating communities with understanding what coercive control is and what it looks like, and opportunities where we can partner with different community groups so that we can talk about healthy relationships. We can talk about what supports are available so people can access. So we're not putting responsibilities on community members to bring somebody forward, but the community is building their capacity to understand what this issue is and what supports are there. One of the programs we're running right now is where we have a police officer teamed up with our social workers, and they go out to verbal domestics where there are no charges laid. Those are homes where we're seeing coercive control. This is the opportunity where we get to go in with our police officers who are trained and work alongside us, where we can influence one another, and we can get in and say, okay, there is help here. There is support. Because sometimes the first place people call is 911.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Thank you. So looking around the room for consensus, we do have 10 minutes left. Are we comfortable doing each of you having a round for 2.5 minutes? And we'll all get 2.5 minutes. And that way that'll bring us right to the end. Okay, so we'll start. Michelle, 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chair, and thanks again, everyone here, for this discussion on coercive control and bringing forth some recommendations that will hopefully save lives. I want to talk about with you, Wanda, if I can. And I'm sorry, I'm distracted by what Shalina just said, because what I've seen is, so my brain is going in two different directions, sorry, because there's just so much information here. But you just said about the police bringing a social worker with them. And what I've seen in my ride-alongs with the police is police have become social workers, and they're not even able to do their real job of sort of enforcing the law anymore, because it's just become this vicious cycle. And I was fortunate enough to visit the Toba Center. Have any of you ever worked with the Toba? Wanda, do you have any intake from the Toba Center? Okay, thank you. I was hoping you would say that. Brilliant center in what they do with the children, in that they are able to do a court from inside this beautiful building and this beautiful space, and doing those kinds of things. But back to what you said earlier in this testimony and in one of your answers is about the generational trauma. So in the sort of education, like, let's go upstream, right? I think we've talked a little bit about intervention and giving a definition to coercive control, what we need to change in the justice system, ensuring that these criminals are out on bail, etc. But if we can go to the prevention end of things and the generational trauma, one of the big things I'm hearing from guards in the jail system is that they don't have the training, or there's not the programming in place to rehabilitate men when they do go into the system. They're often coming out worse than when they went in. They're not learning why they are violent. They're not learning why they are abusive. They're not really getting better. And so I guess I would ask, Julie's looking at me too, I'm open to anybody who wants to answer this, but I guess what I'm saying is the prevention end of it. How do we ensure, what would you add in recommendations for this report for prevention and ensuring we understand healthy relationships and breaking generational trauma?
And there's only about 15 seconds.
Oh my
so.
gosh, I'm sorry.
I can quickly answer something. Thank you for the question. I just want to say in our Prevent It program, we touch upon this. But with regard to the intergenerational trauma, it is of the caregivers, but also the children, because what we're also seeing is that when children come to us, sometimes the offending behavior is more difficult to sort out between that and the trauma responses.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Lisa, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to Emanuela's question about whether we bring in a coercive control law. And it seemed like everyone here around the table is in favor of a law against coercive control. But I'd like to hear from all of you whether you have concerns about it backfiring and being used as a weapon against victims of domestic violence. Julie, do you want to start?
Anything we bring in will be used as a weapon. That's our opinion, because DARVO, which is deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, is a common strategy of abusers. So it doesn't matter what we bring in, they will try to use it.
And it's still worth bringing in a law? Thank you. And I'll go to the rest of you. Wanda, Shalina, and Carla.
I think that men who use coercive control use any system that they can to continue to gain further control of the situation. So, yes, the law is great to have and, hold people accountable, but it can also absolutely backfire. My worry is that there is many women who are living under the conditions of coerced control who will never call the police, who will never be known. Those children continue to be exposed. Those women continue to suffer. And so I think we have to really be thinking about this strategy as upstream, and how do we build a fence at that top of that hill so that we can protect those children from not becoming future abusers or future victims.
Thank you. Carla, do you want to go next? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. There's no time. So what I'm suggesting is that we do submit to you some of our proposals around prevention, but I concur with my colleagues. Definitely anything will be used, but it is important for coercive control to be recognized. But also, please remember, we have a family law system and we have a criminal system that don't always talk, right? Let's talk about also stigmatization of communities, and that's why they don't report to the police, because there is an assumption that abuse happens in some communities or those people. Abuse happens in every culture, in human culture, right? So I would welcome the opportunity to submit something in written form.
Yes, please. Excellent suggestion. And if you have any ideas about how we fix the disconnect between a family court and the criminal court, please include that in your submission.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Neto and Lisa. Adrienne, you have 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So by way of conclusion, thank you to all of the witnesses, and I've been able to turn to all of the witnesses. So now I'd like to put a question that could be put to all of you. I, in the last few months, also participated in a meeting for a group of women on violence against women. There were representatives from community groups, elected officials, representatives from municipal police services as well, and also from the SQ and representatives from the Minister for Public Safety in Quebec. So we see it really is a question of consultation and consultation. When it comes to coercive control specifically, during that meeting, we talked about C-132, or that opened up the door in terms of coercive control, and all of the different parties talked about this. There were certain nuances about this bill. Are you aware of this bill, C-232 rather, and do you think that this could be further improved to bring out another bill on the question of criminalisation of coercive control? What is rather complicated, this is not my expertise. I know that we work with other victims who have got specific opinions on that, and I can send that in writing with more details later. I think that would be better. Thank you very much. And would others like to speak? C-332, or do you think this is not going to actually regulate everything? So what do you think about this recent bill that's come out on coercive control, and also the continuum of services that are offered to victims? And there's just about 30 seconds left if someone would like to react, or also on the question of the funding of healthcare to help groups to help victims. What does someone think about all of that?
Well, I do want to say the recognition of the bill names that this is not right, that this is a problem and this is what it looks like, and people have to be held accountable. But I think the funding for the services to catch people early and those prevention strategies is essential. We know a majority of women will go first to their healthcare provider or to their religious leader when they're having difficulties in their families, in their intimate relationships. And we need to be educating those key stakeholders, because they are the gatekeepers to the service pathways that can unfold for those women and their children.
Thank you so much. Leah, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. My last question I'd like to ask to, a couple of people, but I wanted to start with Madame Poulsen-Holman. You said something that was very concerning to me, that your organization relies on donations. It's concerning to me, especially in the area you're working. We know that services for child sexual abuse already is really underfunded in terms of services. It's disturbing to me that you have to rely on donations to provide services that are already lacking. Do you think that if we're serious about gender-based violence, that we need to ensure that women's organizations are prioritized in budgets to ensure that you have the core funding you need to help the kids and victims that you need to? And maybe keep your answer short so I can ask.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I think you've said it very well. We definitely need core funding in place. Thank you.
I'll pass it on, but just by way of segue, one of the calls for justice is sustainable funding, like not year-to-year funding, but long-term sustainable funding within that core funding. I see that Madame Neto has her hand up, and then we'll go to the last two.
I wanted to make a recommendation. We need to stop funding organizations using a charity model. We need to move on to a social investment model. Organizations like ours shouldn't have to depend on the charity. This is an issue. This is a public issue. This is a public issue. This is everyone's issue. So I support Wanda's assertion. We need to make sure that organizations are able to support the survivors, but we also need to ensure that prevention is prioritized, because otherwise we are going to be back here year after year, study after study. And I will put the rest of my assertions and recommendations in paper again.
Submit that in writing. If anybody has any sort of other recommendations they want to provide to the committee, you're welcome to submit it in writing. I'm getting eyes, and I'm reading your eyes.
Perfect.
Chair.
Thank you very much, Leah. And thank you to all members and all of the witnesses for your testimony today. At this point, is the committee in agreement to adjourn the meeting? Meeting adjourned.